Have you ever stopped to think, like, how do economists actually measure something as fuzzy as uncertainty? I mean, it's a real head scratcher.
It is. It really is. And that's what we're diving into today, this research paper that tackles that exact question.
Yeah, and get this, they're using this incredible treasure trove of data. Millions of stock analyst forecasts.
Millions.
Wow.
Yeah.
Going all the way back to the 1980s.
So we're talking decades of predictions about the future.
Exactly. And what's so cool about this approach is it's like we're tapping into this collective wisdom, or maybe the collective anxiety of all these analysts whose job it is to predict what companies are going to do.
It's like crowdsourcing an economic crystal ball.
Yeah. Kind of like that. In the paper, it's called Deconstructing Uncertainty, which I love that title.
That's a good one.
It really gets to the heart of it. And they found some really interesting patterns. But instead of just looking at whether analysts got like the direction right, like up or down for a company's earnings, they focus on how confident those predictions were.
So it's not just about being right or wrong, but how much conviction they have in their calls.
Exactly. Because think about it, a shaky prediction.
Right?
That's probably more telling than a super confident one.
Yeah, even if it's slightly off.
Right.
You're picking up on something there, for sure. And when you crunch the numbers from all those forecasts, you get this surprisingly clear picture of overall economic uncertainty. It's pretty remarkable.
So they're finding order in the chaos.
Exactly. And the paper even went a step further. They compared this new measure to other methods that are commonly used, like tracking stock market volatility.
Okay. Or
Even analyzing news articles, which...
Hold on. How do you analyze news articles for uncertainty?
It's a field called textual analysis. You basically use computer programs to sift through tons of text and look for patterns.
So like they could track how often words like uncertainty or risk or volatility pop up.
Exactly. You got it. It's like taking the pulse of the financial news.
That's so cool. So did this analyst-based measure kind of hold up against those other approaches?
Oh, what's interesting is that while it did correlate with some of them, particularly the ones using hard economic data,
Okay.
there's reason to believe this new measure might be even more reliable.
More reliable. Why is that?
Well, think about it. These analysts, they have a huge incentive to get things right.
Right. Their reputation's on the line.
Exactly. Their livelihoods depend on it. They don't want to be known for making wild predictions.
The crazy ones.
Haha, exactly. Plus, you got to figure this data is less prone to bias than, say, a survey.
Oh, yeah, where people might be influenced by how they're feeling that day.
Right, their mood or whatever is going on in their lives. So.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting. This measure doesn't just exist in a vacuum. When they mapped this uncertainty index against real-world events, the results were kind of striking.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What did they find?
Imagine looking at a graph and seeing clear spikes that perfectly align with every single recession since the 1980s.
Whoa.
Like-
So it's not just an abstract number. It's capturing something tangible about how the economy actually feels during those uncertain times? You nailed it. From Black Monday in '87 to the bursting of the tech bubble in 2001, and of course the 2008 financial crisis, this measure was right there flashing a warning signal.
That's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
It's like having an early warning system for economic turbulence. But knowing when uncertainty is rising, that's only half the battle, right? What did they find out about what actually happens when things get more unpredictable?
To answer that, they use the statistical technique called VAR analysis. It helps us see how different parts of the economy are interconnected.
They're connected.
Yeah, and how they react to shocks. Think of it like dominoes. You tip one over and it sets off a chain reaction.
Okay, got it. So what happens when the uncertainty domino falls?
Well, the findings were pretty clear and not super surprising. When uncertainty spikes, output takes a hit, employment goes down, even the stock market feels the pain.
So it's like a wave of caution washes over everything.
Exactly. Businesses aren't sure what's coming next, so they're less likely to invest or hire new people. And consumers, they probably tighten their belts too, right?
Yeah, makes sense. It's like everyone's hitting the pause button.
It acts a lot like a negative demand shock where everyone pulls back and waits to see what happens.
Okay, so we've established this uncertainty measure. It's reliable. It tracks with real-world events. And we know that high uncertainty, generally speaking, leads to not so good things for the economy.
Yes.
But is all uncertainty created equal?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's what makes this paper even more compelling because they actually dug deeper into specific industries to see how they're each affected by uncertainty.
I'm guessing they started with the financial sector.
You would be correct. It seems pretty intuitive that uncertainty among banks and investors would have a pretty big impact.
Yeah, for sure.
And their analysis revealed something fascinating. Uncertainty specific to financial firms, it actually hit the stock market harder than general uncertainty.
Harder.
Yeah, and the effects seem to take longer to spread to the real economy.
So Wall Street feels the pain first and most acutely, but eventually ripples outward.
You got it. And economists are still trying to unravel all the mechanisms behind this spillover effect.
It's like financial uncertainty has these long tentacles that reach out and touch every corner of the economy. But what about uncertainty in other industries? How does that play out?
Well, when they compared financial firms to the rest of the economy, they found something interesting. In the short run, uncertainty outside of finance had a bigger impact on the real economy, like things like manufacturing and consumer spending.
Okay, that's interesting.
But things got much more complex when they zoomed in on the period leading up to the 2008 crisis.
Though, that's where things get really scary.
It is, and it's where the story takes another turn.
Oh man, I can't wait to hear more about this. We'll be back with part 2 of our deep dive into deconstructing uncertainty after a short break.
Yeah, so remember how we were talking about how uncertainty in the financial sector can spill over into the real economy?
Yeah, like how Wall Street's jitters can eventually reach Main Street.
Exactly. Well, when they looked closer at the period leading up to the 2008 crisis, they found that the effects of financial uncertainty were actually much more persistent.
Persistent, meaning?
Meaning they lingered for a longer time. They had this kind of long tail that stretched out even after the initial shock had passed.
So it's not just a quick hit and then everything bounces back.
Not necessarily. It seems like financial uncertainty can cast a longer shadow over the economy, and that has some pretty big implications.
Yeah, like what? What does that mean for policymakers and businesses?
Well, for one, it suggests that we might need to rethink how we respond to financial crises. In the past, a lot of the focus has been on providing immediate relief to stabilize things.
Right, like bailouts and stimulus packages.
Exactly. But if the effects of uncertainty are more long-lasting, then we might need to consider more sustained policy measures to support recovery.
So maybe it's not just about putting out the fire, but also about making sure the ground is fertile for regrowth.
That's a great way to put it. And for businesses, it underscores the importance of building resilience into their operations.
Resilience, like being able to adapt to changing conditions.
Exactly. Diversifying their suppliers, having some cash reserves on hand, being prepared to adjust their strategies if needed.
So basically not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Right. Because when uncertainty hits, and it will hit, you want to be able to weather the storm.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked a lot about the U.S. economy, but I have a feeling things get even more complicated when we zoom out to the global level. It's a pretty interconnected world out there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's like that butterfly effect,
Where a butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil and causes a hurricane in Florida.
Right, except in economics, it's less about butterflies and more about things like financial shocks or political events.
Those are some pretty big butterflies.
Uh-huh. Yeah, they can definitely trigger waves of uncertainty that spread across borders.
So how do economists even begin to study something that complex? Are they like tracking every little event in every single country?
Well, that would be a Herculean task. One way to approach it is to focus on global trade networks.
Okay, trade networks, like how countries are connected through imports and exports.
Exactly. So let's say country A is a major trading partner with country B, and suddenly country A experiences a surge in uncertainty.
Okay.
Well, it's likely that businesses in country B are going to feel the effects.
Yeah, makes sense. They might be worried about supply chain disruptions.
Right, or reduced demand for their exports, or even just the general unease of doing business with a partner facing unpredictable times.
It's like a domino effect, but on a global scale.
Right, uncertainty can spread like a chain reaction along those global trade routes.
But it's not just about the flow of goods, right?
Yeah.
It's also about the flow of money.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The financial system, that's a whole other layer of interconnectedness.
Yeah, because banks and investors, they operate across borders all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
So if there's a sudden loss of confidence in one country's financial system, it can quickly spill over to others, especially those that have a lot invested in that country.
It's like everyone's holding hands financially. So when one person gets spooked, the jitters can spread quickly.
And the speed at which money can move these days, it really amplifies that effect.
Wow, it's like uncertainty on warp speed.
Pretty much. But there's another channel for this global transmission of uncertainty that often gets overlooked, and it has to do with good old-fashioned news.
The media.
The media, exactly.
Yeah.
Bad news travels fast.
Especially these days with the internet and social media.
Absolutely. Negative news about one country's economic troubles, it can spread around the world like wildfire.
It's like a contagion, but for bad vibes.
Yeah, kind of. And this can create a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh, how so?
While people see all these scary headlines, they start to pull back,
Makes sense.
which can actually make things worse.
Yeah.
It's like everyone's getting spooked by the same ghost story.
So it's not just about the real economic fundamentals, it's also about how people perceive and react to them.
Exactly. It really highlights how psychology plays a big role in how uncertainty spreads.
So it sounds like this global uncertainty thing, it's a pretty complex beast with lots of moving parts. What does all this mean for businesses and policymakers? How do you even begin to deal with something that feels so uncontrollable?
Well, the first step is simply awareness. Recognizing that uncertainty isn't just a domestic issue, but a global phenomenon. That's crucial.
Okay, so don't bury your head in the sand.
Right. Businesses need to be aware of the potential risks and disruptions that can come from events happening far beyond their own borders.
So if you're a company that relies heavily on imported components from a specific country, maybe you need to diversify your suppliers or have some backup plans in place.
That's a great example. And on the policy side, it really underscores the need for international cooperation and coordination.
So countries working together instead of trying to go it alone.
Exactly. Because when countries work together to share information and develop strategies for mitigating uncertainty, it can make a big difference.
Makes sense. Strength in numbers and all that.
Right. But is there anything else businesses can do besides diversifying and hoping for the best? Are some industries simply more resilient to this global uncertainty than others?
That's a great question, and one I'm sure a lot of our listeners are wondering about.
Yeah, and it's something researchers are actively exploring. For example, companies that focus on local markets or provide essential goods and services.
Things that people always need no matter what's going on in the global economy.
Exactly. Those businesses might be less affected by what's happening on the other side of the world.
So maybe focusing on those needs could be a good strategy for weathering those uncertain times. But what about companies that do operate in those globally exposed industries? Is there anything they can do to uncertainty-proof themselves?
That's where things get really interesting because it's not just about which industries are inherently more or less vulnerable to uncertainty. It's also about how businesses adapt and structure themselves.
So maybe it's less about trying to avoid uncertainty altogether, which is probably impossible, and more about becoming flexible and responsive.
Precisely. And this research on measuring and understanding uncertainty, it gives us valuable tools for doing just that. But there's one more twist in our uncertainty adventure that I think you'll find particularly fascinating.
Okay, lay in on me.
We've talked a lot about the negative consequences of uncertainty, but what if I told you that it's also deeply connected to something we generally view as positive, innovation?
Wait, innovation. That seems like a paradox.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, because innovation is all about pushing boundaries and embracing the new, while uncertainty makes us want to cling to the familiar.
Exactly. And that tension is at the heart of their relationship.
So we're back, and my mind is still blown by this whole uncertainty-innovation connection. It seems so counterintuitive.
It really does. On the one hand, uncertainty can make us risk-averse. We hesitate to try new things when we don't know what the outcome will be.
Right, it's like that fear of the unknown.
Exactly. But on the other hand, uncertainty can also be a powerful driver of innovation.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, think about it. When things are uncertain, it forces us to think outside the box, to come up with creative solutions to adapt and evolve.
So it's like necessity is the mother of invention.
Precisely. When the old ways of doing things no longer work, when the rules of the game are changing, that's when innovation really flourishes.
So it's like uncertainty shakes things up and creates space for new ideas to emerge.
Exactly.
That's right.
It disrupts the status quo and opens up opportunities for those who are willing to embrace the unknown.
So maybe instead of seeing uncertainty as a threat, we should view it as a catalyst for progress.
I think that's a really powerful perspective shift. Because when we embrace uncertainty, we open ourselves up to new possibilities. We become more adaptable, more resilient, more innovative.
So how does this play out in the real world? Can we see this uncertainty innovation dance happening in specific industries?
Absolutely. Take the tech industry, for example. It's a hotbed of innovation, but it's also incredibly volatile and uncertain. New technologies are constantly emerging. Consumer preferences shift rapidly. Entire business models can become obsolete practically overnight.
It sounds like a wild ride.
It is. But the companies that thrive in that environment are the ones that can adapt, quickly pivot when needed, and embrace that constant state of flux. They don't shy away from uncertainty. They see it as an opportunity to learn and evolve.
So it's like they're surfing that wave of uncertainty instead of getting wiped out by it.
Exactly. And that agility, that willingness to experiment and iterate, that's what allows them to stay ahead of the curve.
But what about industries that aren't as fast-paced as tech? Does this uncertainty-innovation connection still hold true?
It does, but it might manifest in different ways. Think about healthcare, for instance. It's a field that's constantly grappling with uncertainty, new diseases, evolving treatments, ethical dilemmas.
And there's this constant push for innovation to find cures, develop better therapies, improve patient care.
Right. And that innovation often involves long, costly research trials testing new drugs or procedures with uncertain outcomes. It requires a willingness to invest in ideas that might not pan out, to accept setbacks as part of the learning process.
So even in a field like healthcare, where the stakes are incredibly high, embracing uncertainty is crucial for progress.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance between managing risk and pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
This makes me think about how this applies to us as individuals, too. We all face uncertainty in our lives, whether it's career choices, relationships, or just figuring out what we want to do with our time.
That's such an important point. And just like those innovative companies, we can choose to view uncertainty not as a threat, but as a springboard for growth and discovery.
So maybe the key takeaway here is that instead of trying to eliminate uncertainty, which is probably impossible, we can learn to embrace it, navigate it, and even harness its power for positive change.
That's a brilliant way to put it. And I think it's a powerful message for all of us, no matter what industry we're in, what stage of life we're at, or what challenges we're facing.
Well said. This has been an incredible deep dive into the world of uncertainty. We've gone from measuring it to understanding its global reach and even its surprising connection to innovation. What a journey.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you some new perspectives on uncertainty and perhaps even inspired you to embrace it in your own endeavors. Remember, sometimes the most uncertain paths lead to the most rewarding destinations. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.